Good day, family, and welcome to today's video. Before we start, let me know what time and place you're watching from. You don't know, we might give you a shout out in our next video. I've got a story today that still makes me feel uneasy every time I think about it. I've never shared it publicly before, but since Thanksgiving's coming up, I figured maybe it's time. This happened 4 years ago, in a small town called Hillsboro, Oregon. Back then, I was 24, working part-time at a grocery store and trying to save up for community college. My family had a small house near the edge of town. It was the kind of place where everyone left their porch lights on, and you could hear kids playing outside, even after dark. Thanksgiving was always my mom's favorite holiday. She'd start cooking 3 days early, humming to herself, while the rest of us cleaned and decorated. It always felt warm and safe until that year. That Thanksgiving, something changed. It started with a note. I found it stuck under our front door early Wednesday morning when I went out to grab the mail. It was just a folded piece of paper, no envelope, no name on it. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were 4 words. "You forgot last year." That was it. At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe one of the neighborhood teens being weird. I tossed it in the trash, didn't even tell my mom. But later that day, when I came home from work, there was another note. This one was inside the screen door, tucked between the frame and the handle. Same handwriting, same message. "You forgot last year." I asked my mom and little sister if they'd seen anyone hanging around, but they hadn't. My mom just shrugged it off, said maybe it was some kind of Thanksgiving joke. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been close enough to our door to leave it there, close enough to see inside if they wanted. That night, as I was helping my mom prep the turkey, I kept glancing toward the kitchen window. We lived next to a row of maple trees, and when the wind blew, their branches scraped softly against the glass. It sounded like fingernails dragging across it. I told myself it was nothing, but when I looked out, just for a second, I could have sworn I saw someone standing between the trees. Not moving, just there, watching. The porch light didn't reach that far, so I couldn't make out a face. But I saw the faint shape of a person, still, patient, as if waiting for me to notice. I blinked, and they were gone. I told my mom what I thought I'd seen. She laughed, and said maybe he was just tired. Maybe she was right, but I remember how her smile faded when I mentioned the notes. She asked to see them. When I told her I'd thrown the first one away, she went quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Don't worry about it. Let's just focus on tomorrow." But she didn't sleep that night. I heard her pacing the living room around midnight. Thanksgiving morning came cold and gray. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house, but the mood felt different, tense, like everyone was pretending to be cheerful. My Uncle Jerry and Aunt Carla arrived around noon. They lived about 30 minutes away, and they were always the loud, funny ones at family gatherings. But even they seemed quieter that day. We sat down to eat around 2. The house was warm, laughter started to pick up again, and I almost managed to forget the notes until the power went out. It happened right in the middle of grace. 1 second, everything was lit and glowing. The next, we were sitting in complete darkness. The heater cut off, the oven beeped, and the only sound was the soft whine of the wind outside. My uncle muttered something about the circuit breaker and went to check the basement. I got up too, grabbing my phone flashlight. When we opened the basement door, a rush of cold air hit us, colder than it should have been. The basement light was still on. The switch worked, but every other light in the house was dead. Then we saw it, a new note, sitting on the bottom step. Same handwriting. "Don't forget again." My uncle frowned and asked if it was a joke. I told him it wasn't funny, that I'd found others before. He looked uneasy, told me to stay upstairs and keep everyone calm while he checked the fuse box. 5 minutes later, the lights flickered back on. He came up looking pale, holding something in his hand. It was another folded note, this one taped to the side of the fuse box. He didn't show my mom what it said, but I saw the way she grabbed his arm when he whispered it to her. After dinner, when everyone was cleaning up, I pulled my uncle aside and asked what the note said. He hesitated, then told me, "We remember you." I didn't understand. I asked what that meant, but he didn't answer. He just said, "Lock the doors tonight." That night, I barely slept. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the back door creaking open. I froze, listening. The wind was howling, rattling the windows. I told myself it was just the wind, until I heard footsteps on the kitchen floor. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I grabbed my phone and crept out of bed, the floorboards groaning under me. When I peeked around the corner into the kitchen, the light from the street lamp outside was enough to show me the back door. It was open, not wide, just a few inches. Cold air poured in. There was something on the floor by the doorway, a small, square shape. Another note. I picked it up with shaking hands. This one said, "We never left." I slammed the door shut and locked it. Then I ran to my mom's room, but she wasn't there. Her bed was empty, the sheets thrown aside. I called out her name, but only my sister answered, sleepy and confused. We searched the whole house, every room, every closet. My mom was gone. The police came within the hour. They searched the neighborhood, the woods behind our house, even checked the security cameras at the grocery store where I worked. Nothing. No signs of a break-in. No fingerprints. The only thing they found was one last note, hidden behind the refrigerator. It said, in the same shaky handwriting, "Thank you for remembering." But none of us knew what that meant. Days turned into weeks, and there was no trace of her. My uncle stayed with us for a while, trying to keep things normal, but the house felt empty, haunted, not by ghosts, but by questions. A month later, on Christmas morning, a package showed up on our porch. No return address. Inside was a small, glass turkey figurine, the kind you'd use as a decoration. It was cracked down the middle, like it had been dropped and glued back together. Under was a note. "We're together again." The police tested it for prints, but there were none. It's been 4 years now. My mom was never found. We moved out of that house 6 months later, and it's still empty today. No one wants to buy it. Sometimes around Thanksgiving, I dream about that basement, about those words. "You forgot last year." I keep wondering what it was that we were supposed to remember. And sometimes, when I walk past a store window and see a reflection behind me, just for a second, I swear I see her standing there, smiling faintly. But when I turn around, there's no one. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more true horror stories. And if you've ever experienced something strange during Thanksgiving, drop your story in the comments. You might just hear it in our next video. I've worked as a night security guard for nearly 10 years, but nothing ever shook me quite like what happened on Thanksgiving week back in 2018 in Amarillo, Texas. It's strange, the things that stick with you. The smell of old wood floors, the buzz of a flickering light, the weight of silence at 3 a.m. I still hear that silence sometimes, even now. I was stationed in an old office building downtown, the kind of place that used to be busy in the 70s, but now sat mostly empty. Only a few small companies rented offices inside, and most of them were closed for the holiday. My job was simple: do hourly rounds, keep an eye on the cameras, and make sure no one tried to break in. Usually it was boring work, but that Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, it felt off. Around 9:30 p.m., I noticed the security cameras in the east corridor started glitching. The screen flickered between static and black, then came back for a second before cutting out again. I thought maybe the storm outside had knocked something loose. The wind was howling, and rain pounded against the windows hard enough to sound like knocks. Still, procedure was procedure. I grabbed my flashlight, radioed the front desk, even though I was the only guard on duty that night, and headed down the hall. The building smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something else, dust, maybe, or mold. The lights hummed softly overhead, but in the east corridor, half of them were out. My flashlight beam cut through the dark like a tunnel. When I reached the camera mount, I noticed it had been turned slightly, like someone had grabbed it and twisted it toward the wall. The screws were loose. That was odd, because I checked it 2 nights earlier. I fixed the angle, gave it a light tap, and was about to head back when something caught my eye. A piece of paper taped to the far door. It was an office door I'd never seen open before. The paper had just 2 words written in black marker: "Don't stay." At first, I laughed under my breath. Probably one of the maintenance guys, playing a prank. Still, something about the handwriting bothered me. The letters were neat, but uneven, as if someone had written them in a hurry with shaking hands. I peeled it off, crumpled it, and tossed it in my pocket. Then I went back to the control room. The rest of the night was quiet until about 1 a.m. That's when I heard footsteps on the 3rd floor. Now, the 3rd floor was completely vacant. No tenants, no furniture, nothing but old cubicles and dusty carpets. I double-checked the sign-in sheet to make sure no one had come in late. Nothing. The footsteps were slow, heavy like work boots. They echoed faintly through the ceiling. I grabbed my flashlight again, heart pounding faster this time, and took the elevator up. When the doors opened, the floor was dark except for one light at the far end of the hallway. The air up there felt colder, not freezing, but cold enough to make me notice. I started down the hall, my shoes making that hollow squeak on the linoleum. As I passed the first few cubicles, I noticed something strange. One of the desks had a fresh cup of coffee sitting on it. Steam was still rising from it. That didn't make sense. There was no one here. I called out, "Security. Anyone up here?" No answer. I rounded the corner and stopped. Another note was taped to the wall. This one said, "Leave before they arrive." I felt a chill crawl up my back. My first thought was that someone was trying to mess with me. Maybe a group of teens who'd snuck in somehow. But how would they know where the cameras were blind? I radioed the building manager, Mr. Hall, but got no reply. Service was spotty inside the old building, so I decided to check the offices one by one. The next few rooms were empty. Chairs pushed under desks, computers off, blinds closed. But when I reached the end of the hall, where that single light glowed, I noticed the door was open just a crack. I pushed it open slowly. Inside was an empty office. The desk was bare except for one item, a framed photo. I picked it up and felt my stomach twist. It was a picture of the old security staff. 6 people standing outside the same building, all smiling. But taped to the frame was a note, same handwriting as before. Only one made it home. My flashlight flickered. The building groaned in the wind. I could hear the rain slapping against the windows harder now. For a moment, I thought I heard whispering, faint behind me. I turned fast, beams slicing through the empty room. Nothing. My heart was thudding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to believe it was just a prank, but there was something about those notes, something almost pleading in the words, like whoever wrote them wasn't trying to scare me, but to warn me. I went back downstairs to the control room, locked the door, and pulled up the cameras. Every hallway looked empty, except the 3rd floor. The same camera that had glitched earlier was now showing static again. Only, this time, the static wasn't uniform. There was a faint outline moving through it, like the shape of a person walking slowly toward the camera. I blinked, leaned closer. The shape stopped right in front of the lens. And for just half a second, not even long enough for me to react, it looked like a face was pressed against the glass. Pale, eyes wide, mouth open as if shouting silently. Then the feed cut out completely. I locked every exit I could and sat in that control room till sunrise. When Mr. Hall came in at 7 a.m., I told him everything. The notes, the 3rd floor, the camera footage. He listened quietly, then said something that still sent a shiver down my spine. He said, "That floor shouldn't have power. It's been disconnected for years." I told him that couldn't be right. The light was on, the hallway was lit. He just shook his head and said, "No, we cut the power after the fire." Apparently, 5 years earlier, long before I started, there had been a fire on the 3rd floor. Faulty wiring. One of the security guards didn't make it out. His name was Eli Barker. Mr. Hall said no one had used that level since. I didn't tell him about the photo, but that evening, before my shift ended, I went back up one last time. The hallway was completely dark. The light that had been glowing the night before was off. The desk where I'd seen the coffee cup was covered in dust, untouched for years. But the photo frame was still there, only now the picture was gone. In its place was one final note. "Thank you for staying." I left that job the next week. I still work security, but never overnight and never in old buildings. Every Thanksgiving since then, I make sure to leave a cup of coffee out wherever I'm working, just in case someone's still doing their rounds, watching over the place. And sometimes, when I pass by a hallway camera and catch my reflection in the monitor, I can't help wondering if somewhere, someone's still watching me back. I don't usually talk about this, but every Thanksgiving, it comes back to me like a smell you can't wash off. This happened 5 years ago in Columbus, Ohio, when I decided to host Thanksgiving dinner for the first time in my own house. I just bought a small 2-bedroom place on the east side. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I've been excited, nervous, sure, but it felt like a milestone. My parents were getting older, and I thought it would be nice to let them relax while I handled everything. My younger brother Eric and his wife Dana were coming too. We weren't as close as we used to be, but I thought maybe the holiday could fix that. It didn't. The morning started perfectly normal. I woke up early, put on some music, and started prepping the turkey. The smell of butter and herbs filled the kitchen. For a few hours, I actually felt proud. Then, around 11 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was Eric, holding a pie box and wearing that fake grin I'd known since we were kids. Dana followed behind him, quiet, clutching her phone. My parents came a few minutes later. My dad hugged me, so hard I nearly dropped a bowl, and my mom kept saying how proud she was. For a while, the house felt alive. Voices, laughter, pots clanging, the TV softly playing a parade. But then, like a shift in the wind, something changed. It started small. When I asked Eric to grab a carving knife from the drawer, he froze. "You don't still keep them there, do you?" he said, voice low. I laughed, thinking he was joking. Where else would I keep knives? He just stared at the drawer like it was something dangerous. Dana reached for his hand, whispered something, and he let it go. I brushed it off, but after that, the air between us stayed tense. Every time I caught his eye, he'd look away. At one point, while we were setting the table, I heard him mutter to Dana, "I can't believe he bought this house." We sat down to eat around too. The turkey came out golden, the mashed potatoes perfect, the candles lit. Everyone filled their plates, and for a moment, it felt like the Thanksgiving I'd imagined. Then my dad said, "You did good, son. You made this place feel like home." And that's when Eric put his fork down. "You mean like the last one?" he said quietly. The room went still. My mom's eyes widened. "Eric," she warned. He just laughed under his breath. "What? He doesn't remember, does he?" I frowned. "Remember what?" Nobody answered. I tried to shake it off, but something about the way they looked at each other, my dad staring at his plate, my mom twisting her napkin, made my stomach tighten. After dinner, I went to get dessert from the counter. When I opened the pie box Eric had brought, there was a folded note sitting on top of the pie. "Do you remember now?" I turned toward him, but he was outside on the porch, smoking. I showed the note to my mom. Her face went pale. "It's not funny, Eric," she called through the window. He just exhaled smoke and said, "I'm not the one who needs reminding." That night, after everyone left, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet. Every creak of the floor made me flinch. Around midnight, I heard someone knocking on the back door. 3 slow knocks. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the kitchen, heart pounding. The glass door fogged slightly from the cold. When I shined the light, there was no one outside, but there was something taped to the door. Another note. The basement. Here's the thing, I didn't have a basement. At least, I didn't think I did. When I bought the house, the inspector mentioned a crawl space accessible through the pantry floor, but I'd never opened it. Still, curiosity, or fear, pushed me to look. I moved the pantry shelves aside, pulled up the small wooden hatch, and shined my flashlight down. A narrow set of steps led into darkness. The air smelled stale, like damp wood and something older. I climbed down slowly, one hand on the wall. The flashlight beam caught something shiny at the far corner. A small, metal plaque nailed to the foundation wall. It read, "For the Barker family, 2009. The name didn't mean anything to me at first. Then I noticed faint outlines on the wall, like someone had once written on it in chalk, now mostly wiped away. Only one word was still visible. "Sorry." I felt the floor creak behind me and spun around. Eric was standing at the top of the hatch, looking down. His face was pale. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. I asked him what was going on. He didn't answer right away. He just stared past me, toward the plaque. Finally, he said, "You really don't remember, do you?" When I didn't respond, he climbed halfway down and sat on the step. His voice shook. "This used to be our house," he said. "Before you bought it, before it was sold. Mom and Dad owned it. You were 8. There was a gas leak that night, Thanksgiving Eve. You and I were sleeping in the basement when it happened. I woke up to smoke. You didn't. I felt cold all over." "What are you talking about?" He looked at me like I was breaking apart in front of him. "They told you it was a different house. They thought it was better that way. You don't remember the fire because you hit your head trying to get out." I wanted to say he was lying, but something in his voice told me he wasn't. We went upstairs. I sat on the couch, staring at the walls, trying to make sense of it. Eric poured me water and said softly, When you bought this place, Mom cried for a week. We didn't know how to tell you. I asked why he left the notes. He sighed. Because you were starting to talk about remembering things. You told me on the phone last month you'd been having dreams about fire and smoke. I thought maybe if I showed you the truth, you'd stop digging. He looked exhausted, older somehow. We didn't want to hurt you, man. We just wanted you to have peace. For a long time, we just sat there, the only sound the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Eventually, I asked him why the basement plaque said Barker family. He said the house had been rebuilt years later and sold to another family, the Barkers. They lived there until 2016, when they moved out after what they called bad luck. A few years later, I bought it. He said maybe we weren't the only ones who left something behind. By the time the sun came up, I felt strangely calm. Everything I tried to ignore finally made sense. The smell of smoke I sometimes thought I imagined. The faint headaches, the dreams. I didn't hate Eric for what he did. I understood. That morning, we sealed the hatch and covered it with new boards. I've hosted Thanksgiving ever since, but every year before I start cooking, I'll light a small candle on the kitchen counter and whisper for whoever's still down there. Then I open the windows, just to let the air move freely. And for the first time in my life, the silence in this house feels gentle, not heavy. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If this story gave you chills, or made you think of something from your own past, drop your story in the comments. I might share it in the next episode. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of true Thanksgiving horror stories. I used to think nothing truly bad could happen in a small town. That changed the Thanksgiving I spent in Marietta, Georgia, 2 years ago. Back then, I worked as a local newspaper photographer, small events, high school games, farmers markets, that sort of thing. Around the holidays, we'd cover human interest stories. And that year my editor asked me to shoot a piece about an old community tradition called the empty plate dinner. Every Thanksgiving, the town hosted a free meal at the church hall for anyone who didn't have family nearby. Locals would bring homemade dishes, and one extra plate was always set at each table. For someone who can't be here, they said. It sounded nice. But that year, something felt different about it from the moment I arrived. The church sat near the edge of town, beside a line of tall pine trees that whispered when the wind hit them. The air smelled like with smoke and gravy. Inside, tables stretched wall to wall, covered in white cloths and warm food. Everyone was cheerful. At first, I was taking photos of people laughing, passing rolls, pouring cider. Then, while reviewing shots on my camera, I noticed something strange. In almost every photo, someone was staring directly into the lens. Not smiling, not posing, just staring. I didn't think much of it until I realized the same man appeared in several shots. Same gray jacket, same expression. I didn't remember seeing him in a room, but there he was, always sitting behind someone, slightly out of focus. When I looked up to check, I couldn't find him anywhere. After dinner, I went outside for some air. The sky had turned dark, and the parking lot lights hummed softly. That's when I saw him. He was standing by the tree line, half-shadowed, his hands in his pockets. Older guy, maybe in his 60s. His face was lined, and his eyes, even from a distance, looked tired. I raised my hand and called out, "Hey, were you inside earlier?" He didn't answer. I took a step closer, and that's when he said, almost too quietly to hear, "You shouldn't take pictures of empty seats." Before I could reply, he turned and walked into the woods. That night, I went home and started sorting through the photos. I figured I'd edit them for the morning upload. But the more I looked, the stranger they got. In some of the pictures, the empty plates, the ones set out for someone who couldn't be there, didn't look empty anymore. In one, there was a faint blur, like a shape of a hand resting near the fork. In another, a shadow curved across the plate, but there was no person to cast it. When I zoomed in on the clearest image, I swear it looked like the outline of a face reflected in the spoon. A face that wasn't mine. I shut my laptop and told myself I was just tired. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, the paper's editor called me. He said one of the church volunteers had asked to meet. She didn't want to talk over the phone. Her name was Mrs. Hutchins, a small woman with silver hair and a voice that trembled when she spoke. We met at a diner near the square. She thanked me for covering the dinner, then asked quietly, "Did you see him?" When I hesitated, she said, "The man in the gray jacket." I nodded slowly. Her hand shook as she stirred her coffee. "He comes every year," she whispered. "He sits down, eats in silence, then leaves before dessert. We set his plate whether he shows up or not." I asked who he was. She said, "His name was Harold Bell. He died 10 years ago, the first year we started the empty plate dinner." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know how else to react. "You mean people think they see him?" She looked me dead in the eye. "No, dear. I mean, we all saw him. Every year, someone different sits next to his plate. And afterward, something bad happens." I told her that sounded like small town rumor. She didn't argue. She just said, "You'll understand soon." I tried to brush it off. But that night, as I went through my photos again, I found one I hadn't noticed before. It was from the moment I'd stepped outside, a reflection in the church's glass door. Behind me, clear as day, was Harold Bell, standing inches away, his eyes fixed on my back. The next morning, the editor called again. He said there'd been a fire. The church hall had burned down overnight. They thought it started near the kitchen, maybe faulty wiring. No one was inside, thankfully, but all the decorations, the tables, everything were gone. I told myself it was coincidence. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about that man's words. You shouldn't take pictures of empty seats. So I went back through the archives, old editions of the paper. Sure enough, every year for the past decade, someone from the event had been involved in some kind of tragedy. A car accident, a house fire, a disappearance. And in almost every photo, in the background somewhere, was the same gray-jacketed man. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not because I was scared, but because part of me didn't believe it, didn't want to. I deleted all my photos from that night. Every single one. But a few days later, while I was editing a completely unrelated shoot, a local sports game, one image caught my eye. In the background, far behind the bleachers, stood a familiar figure in a gray jacket, watching. That was when I packed up my gear, quit the paper, and left Marietta. I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and started freelancing quietly. Weddings, portraits, anything that didn't involve crowds. Last year, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photo print. It was one of the pictures I deleted. The church hall, the full tables, the warm lighting. But now, the empty plate, seats were filled. Every one of them. The people sitting there all had the same face, Harold Bell's. At the bottom, written in neat handwriting, was a short message. "Thank you for remembering us. I burned the photo that night. This Thanksgiving, I won't be taking any pictures. Not at dinner, not of family, not of anything. Sometimes I still feel like someone's watching me through a lens that isn't there. Like the moment you sense a flash, but there's no camera, no light. I used to think small towns were safe. Now I know. Safety is just something we tell ourselves when the lights are on." I never liked going back to my hometown, but that Thanksgiving, I didn't have a choice. My dad had been in the hospital, and my sister begged me to come home just this once. Home was Coldwater, Michigan, a quiet place with one main street, 2 diners, and a population that never seemed to change. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone remembered everything. I hadn't been back in 7 years. When I pulled into the driveway of our old house, the air smelled like wood smoke and wet leaves. My sister Lynn was standing on the porch, bundled in a coat, smiling like she didn't hate me anymore. I wish I could say that smile lasted. Inside, the house felt smaller than I remembered. Same brown carpet, same faded wallpaper, same family photos, except one was missing. The photo that used to hang by the hallway mirror. The one from our last Thanksgiving together before I left. When I asked about it, Lynn's smile faltered. "We took it down," she said. "Dad didn't like looking at it anymore." I didn't press. We ate dinner early that evening, just the 2 of us. The turkey was dry, but the mashed potatoes were perfect. Lynn had always been good at that. She talked about work, about how quiet the town had gotten, about how she still saw some of the old neighbors. Then, halfway through dessert, she said something that made my stomach tighten. "You should go see the neighbors while you're here," she said. "They still ask about you." "The Harpers?" I asked. She nodded. "Especially Mr. Harper. The Harpers lived 2 houses down. When I was a kid, I used to mow their lawn for $5 a week. Mr. Harper had been an odd man. Polite, but serious. He'd always offer me lemonade afterward, and we'd sit on his porch while he told old stories about his time as a firefighter. Then one summer, his son disappeared. He was 10. They said he wandered off during a family camping trip. They never found him. That was 20 years ago. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, I walked down the street just to clear my head. The cold air stung my lungs, but it felt good. Most of the houses had their curtains open, lights glowing warm and soft. When I passed the Harper's place, I saw the front door slightly open. I hesitated. Maybe they just stepped out. But then I heard someone call my name. Mark. It was Mr. Harper. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner, gray hair, combed neatly back. He was wearing a cardigan and holding a tray covered with foil. "Didn't think you'd ever come back," he said with a weak smile. We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then he said, "Come in for a minute. I've got something to show you." The inside of the house smelled like cinnamon and dust. The furniture hadn't changed. Same floral couch, same heavy curtains. But what caught my eye were the photos. Hundreds of them, lining the walls. Every one of them of children, smiling, laughing, some with missing teeth, some in school clothes. I recognized a few faces, kids from our neighborhood. And in the center of the living room wall, framed larger than the rest, was a picture I hadn't seen in decades. A group shot from a community Thanksgiving dinner, maybe 20 years ago. There I was, 12 years old, standing near the table. And right beside me, the Harper boy. I remembered that dinner. I remembered him tugging on my sleeve, saying he wanted to show me something outside. I remembered following him toward the door. But after that, nothing. Just a blank. Mr. Harper must have seen something in my face because he said softly, "You don't remember that day, do you?" I swallowed. "Not really." He nodded slowly, then motioned toward an old wooden box on the table. "Maybe this will help." Inside were Polaroids. Faded, grainy. At first, they looked like normal snapshots. People cooking, kids running around. Then the later ones started to look different. In one, the Harper boy was standing in front of the woods at the edge of town. In another, he was holding something shiny, a metal toy car maybe. And in the last photo, taken from a distance, you could see two figures walking toward the trees. One of them was him. The other one looked like me. I stepped back, my heart hammering. "Where did you get these?" He looked down at his hands. "I didn't take them," he said quietly. "I found them in a shoebox under your old porch when we were helping your dad rebuild the steps. That was years ago." I shook my head. "That's not possible." He met my eyes. "You were the last person who saw my boy alive, Mark." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. I could hear the faint tick of a clock somewhere behind me. "I don't remember what happened," I said. He didn't move. "Maybe you just don't want to." I left without another word and walked straight home. Lynn was in the kitchen, washing dishes. She looked at me once and said, "You went to see him. Did you know?" I asked. She turned off the faucet. "Dad said not to talk about it. You were a kid. You didn't mean for anything to happen." My chest tightened. "What happened, Lynn?" She looked like she might cry. "You two went into the woods to play. You came back without him. You said he fell and hit his head, but by the time Dad and the police got there was nothing. No body, no tracks. It rained that night. Washed everything away." I sat down slowly, trying to remember. The smell of pine needles, the sound of running water, the echo of laughter. It was all fragments, flashes. Finally, I whispered, "I didn't hurt him." She said softly, "No one said you did." But the way she wouldn't look at me told me otherwise. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that last photo, the two small figures disappearing into the trees. Sometime around 3 a.m., I went outside. The air was cold enough to make my breath look like smoke. The Harper's porch light was still on. I stood there for a long time, staring at that house, thinking about everything that had been buried. Memories, guilt, a whole life built on silence. Then I walked to the woods. The trees groaned in the wind. The ground was wet and soft. I walked deeper until I reached a clearing I hadn't seen since childhood. And there, half buried under a layer of leaves, was something metal glinting faintly in the moonlight. It was a toy car, rusted, but still recognizable. I knelt down and picked it up. My hands were shaking. In the distance, I thought I heard a voice, just a faint echo, high and thin, like a boy calling someone's name. I whispered, "I'm sorry." And for the first time in years, I meant it. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office. They brought in a crew, dug up the clearing. A few hours later, they found what was left of a small skeleton. The coroner confirmed it that afternoon. The Harper boy. They said it looked like he fell into a sinkhole, An accident. Mr. Harper came by the house that evening. He didn't say much. Just took my hand and said, "He can rest now." Then he walked away. I stayed another week in Coldwater to help Lynn pack up the house. When I finally left, the air smelled like pine and rain again. I thought maybe that was the town's way of saying it was over. But as I drove out, I saw Mr. Harper standing on his porch, holding something small in his hand. A rusted toy car. He lifted it slightly, nodded once, and went back inside. I haven't been back since. Some memories you can't erase. You can only live with them. That Thanksgiving, I learned that sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It just makes you quiet. You ever work a job so quiet it makes you hear things that aren't there? That was me 3 years ago on Thanksgiving night, sitting behind the counter at a 24-hour diner in Flagstaff, Arizona. I'd been working there for almost a year, the kind of place where truckers stop for coffee and college kids order fries at 2 a.m. The sign out front flickered half the time, and the jukebox only played 2 songs, both off-key. But it was steady work, and I didn't have anywhere else to be. That night, it was just me, Sharon, the cook, and one customer who wouldn't stop staring at the pie case. I started my shift at 6 p.m., right as the sun was dipping behind the mountains. The wind was cold and dry, carrying that sharp smell of dust and gas from the highway. Inside, everything smelled like burnt coffee and syrup. "Happy Thanksgiving," Sharon said, flipping eggs like it was any other day. "Yeah," I said. "You too." Neither of us meant it. Around 8, the customer came in, tall guy, maybe late 40s, wearing a tan jacket and a red baseball cap. He sat in the corner booth near the window and ordered black coffee. He didn't touch it, just stared out the window, watching the parking lot. Every few minutes, he'd tap the table with his fingers, steady and slow. When I went to check on him, he looked up and asked, "You get many travelers this time of year?" I told him not really, just folks passing through, heading south before the snow. He smiled, small, tight-lipped. That's what I thought. Then he asked, "You been working here long?" "A while," I said. He nodded like that meant something to him. Then he said, "Long enough to notice what changes." I didn't know what he meant, but something about the way he said it made me uneasy. His eyes didn't blink much, and when they did, it looked forced, like he had to remind himself to do it. Sharon noticed me glancing at him. When I went back behind the counter, she said under her breath, "That guy gives me the creeps. He's just quiet," I said, though I didn't believe it. The clock above the register ticked loudly. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for his old blue pickup. The highway beyond was quiet too. No headlights, no noise. It was like the whole world had stopped moving. Around 9:30, another customer came in, a woman in a green coat with a small suitcase. She looked exhausted, like she'd been crying. She sat 2 booths away from the man and ordered tea. The man didn't look at her, but his tapping stopped. "Well, I brought her tea," she said softly. "Do you know if there's a bus stop nearby?" "About 3 miles that way," I said, pointing toward the road. Her hands trembled when she lifted the cup. "I just need to get out of town," she whispered. I wanted to ask why, but before I could, the man in the tan jacket spoke without turning around. "Buses don't run on Thanksgiving." The woman froze. "How did you?" He turned then, smiling faintly. "It's a small town. Everyone knows everything." Sharon peeked through the kitchen window, mouthing, "What's going on?" I shrugged, pretending I wasn't unnerved. A few minutes later, I went to check on him again. His coffee was still full, cold now. I said, "You need a refill?" He didn't answer. He just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small photo. He slid it across the table toward me. It was a picture of 2 people, a man and a woman, standing in front of the diner. I recognized the sign instantly. The same faded, open 24 hours. But the people in the photo weren't familiar. The man was wearing the same jacket he had on now. The woman looked a lot like the one sitting 2 booths away. My stomach dropped. "Where did you get this?" I asked. He looked out the window again. "Been coming here for years," he said. "They used to work here." I walked back to the counter, my pulse racing. Sharon whispered, "What's going on?" I showed her the photo. She frowned, then went pale. "That's Sarah," she said, pointing at the woman. "She worked here before me. Quit the year I started. Moved to New Mexico, I think. And the guy." She hesitated. "That's her husband. Heard he went missing." I looked back toward the booth, but the man was gone. The coffee cup, the photo, even the chair, empty. I rushed to the door, scanning the parking lot. His truck was still there, but no one inside. The wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the window frames. Then the woman in the green coat called softly, "Can I see that picture?" When I handed it to her, she covered her mouth. "This is my sister," she said. She told us her name was Emily, and she'd come to Flagstaff to look for her sister Sarah. She used to work here, she said. Said she met a man. Nice at first, then not so nice. After that, she stopped calling. Sharon, and I just stared at her. I asked when she'd last heard from her. "Thanksgiving," Emily said. 4 years ago tonight. She said Sarah called her crying, saying she was leaving town that night, heading to her. She never arrived. When the police searched, they found her car parked near the woods off Highway 89. Empty. We sat there for a long time, the three of us, saying nothing. The hum of the lights filled the silence. Around 11 o'clock, headlights appeared outside, the old blue pickup pulling out of the lot, heading toward the highway. No one had seen him get in. I ran to the window and caught one last glimpse of him. That same tan jacket, that same red cap, hands tied on the wheel. The woman in the green coat stood beside me, her voice shaking. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the man she was running from." We called the police, but by the time they arrived, the truck was gone. They searched the roads all night, but found nothing. A week later, an officer came to the diner. They'd found the pickup abandoned near the same stretch of highway where Sarah's car had been left years earlier. Inside was a box of old photos, people at the diner, smiling, unaware of the camera. The newest photo was from that Thanksgiving night. Me, Sharon, and Emily, standing by the window. None of us remembered anyone taking it. I quit the diner 2 months later. Couldn't handle the night shift anymore. Every time the doorbell chimed, I half expected that man to walk back in, sit in the same booth, order the same cold coffee. Sharon still works there, though. Says she keeps an extra slice of pie in the case every Thanksgiving, for the quiet ones, she calls it. Emily moved to Phoenix, started volunteering at shelter. She sends a Christmas card every year, but she never mentions her sister. Sometimes, late at night, I dream about the hum of those diner lights, that endless desert wind, and the reflection of a man in the window, smiling faintly, like he never really left. If this story made you think twice about quiet places or strange faces, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more true horror stories. And if you've ever worked a lonely night shift that didn't feel right, share your story in the comments. You never know, your story might be the next one we tell. I used to think family gatherings were supposed to feel safe. That changed the Thanksgiving I spent at my cousin's farmhouse in Wiscasset, Maine. It's one of those small coastal towns that get swallowed by fog at night. The kind where the air smells like salt and pine, and every house creaks when the wind moves through it. My cousin Daniel inherited the place from his grandfather. He and his wife, Mara, decided to host Thanksgiving that year. Said it'd be a good way to reconnect. At first it was, then the snow came, and the power went out. That's when things started to feel wrong. The drive up there took 4 hours. By the time I arrived, the sky was already bruised gray. The farmhouse sat on a hill surrounded by trees that looked like they'd been there forever. Daniel met me at the door with a grin. "You made it." Inside smelled like cinnamon and firewood. There were candles on the table, pies cooling by the window, and the faint hum of old country music coming from a radio that looked older than me. The rest of the family was there too. My Aunt Lydia, my younger cousin Ben, and Mara's parents, who mostly kept to themselves. Everything seemed normal, just noisy and warm, like every Thanksgiving should be, until Aunt Lydia leaned over during dinner and said quietly, "You remember the last time we were all here?" I told her I didn't. She smiled thinly. That's probably for the best. I didn't think much of it then. But later that night, when the storm hit and the power cut out, something about the house changed. The air got heavier, colder. The quiet felt unnatural, like the sound had been sucked out of the world. We lit candles, and Daniel brought out an old oil lamp from the pantry. The shadows stretched long across the walls. That's when I noticed a framed photo on the mantel. It was a family picture, all of us standing outside the same farmhouse. Everyone was smiling, except one person I didn't recognize. A man standing behind us, half hidden by the porch beam. He wasn't in focus, but there was something about his posture, the way his shoulders leaned forward, that made me uneasy. I asked Daniel who it was. He looked at it for a moment, then said, "No idea. Must have been someone passing by." But the way his voice dropped told me he didn't believe that. By 9, the wind was howling. Snow pressed against the windows like white fog. The house popped and groaned under the weight of it. We gathered in the living room, huddled near the fireplace. Mara tried to lighten the mood, pouring wine and cracking jokes, but everyone was too tense. Then Ben, who was sitting by the window, said, "There's someone outside." Everyone turned. At first, I thought it was a trick of the snow, but no, there was definitely a shape out there. Tall, still, standing by the treeline. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and went to the front door. "Probably a neighbor checking on us," he said. But when he opened the door and shined the light, the figure was gone. He stepped out onto the porch, scanning the trees. "Hello." Nothing, just the wind and the crunch of snow. He came back inside, brushing flakes off his jacket. "Nobody there," he said. Aunt Lydia muttered, "You should have stayed inside." Later, after everyone went to bed, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet again. No furnace, no hum of appliances, just the tick of the wind and the creak of wood. I decided to get some water. As I passed the living room, I noticed the photo on the mantle again, but something about it looked off. The man in the background wasn't half hidden anymore. He was standing closer. You could see his face now, just barely, but enough to notice the faintest smile. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became. The photo had changed, and the thing that chilled me most, his eyes weren't looking at the camera anymore. They were looking at me. The next morning, I told Daniel. He laughed it off, said the candlelight must have played tricks on my eyes. But when he picked up the photo, his smile faded. He didn't say anything, just put a face down on the mantle. Breakfast was quiet. Mara's parents left right after, saying the storm had cleared enough for driving. Aunt Lydia stayed behind, pacing near the window. Around noon, she asked Daniel if the shed still had that trapdoor. He frowned. "What trapdoor?" "The one under the rug," she said. I looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" She sighed. "You really don't remember, do you? We went out to the shed together. It was small and cluttered with old tools, boxes, and a single bare light bulb swinging overhead. Aunt Lydia knelt and pulled up a corner of the rug in the center. Beneath it was a wooden hatch, dusty, padlocked. Daniel stared at it like he'd never seen it before. "What the hell is this?" Lydia said softly. "Your grandfather had a root cellar here. He used to keep things down there he didn't want the kids touching." "Like what?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I only remember the smell. Like something rotten." Daniel grabbed a crowbar from the wall and broke the old lock. The hatch creaked open, and a wave of cold air drifted up. The smell hit first, damp earth, rust, and something else I couldn't place. He pointed his flashlight down. The stairs were narrow, carved into dirt. "Stay here," he said. But Aunt Lydia said, "No, you shouldn't go alone." So we all went. The cellar was small, just a few feet wide, lined with shelves of jars and old wooden crates. The floor was covered in dry leaves that must have blown in over time. Then Daniel's flashlight landed on something in the corner, a pile of fabric. He crouched and pulled it closer. It was an old coat. Beneath it was a small, rusted tin box. Inside were Polaroids, dozens of them. Each one showed the same farmhouse, the porch, the kitchen, the living room. Some had people in them, people who looked like us, just from different years. Thanksgiving after Thanksgiving. And in every single one, somewhere in the background, was that same man, same face, same stance, always watching. Daniel dropped the box like it burned him. "This is insane," he said. "Someone's messing with us." But Aunt Lydia's face went pale. She whispered, "That's your grandfather's coat." Daniel didn't answer. He just walked back up the stairs, fast. When we got outside, he kicked the rug back over the hatch and locked the shed door. We never spoke about it again. That evening, I packed my bags early. Daniel hugged me goodbye, but didn't say much. His eyes looked haunted. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced at the porch. The photo frame was back upright on the mantle, and from the road, through the window, I could just make out the reflection of someone standing in the doorway. Tall, still, watching, but I didn't stop the car. I just kept driving until the trees thinned and the fog gave way to open sky. A week later, Daniel called. He said the farmhouse had burned down. Electrical fire, they said. No one hurt. He sounded calm, but there was something strange in his voice. Relief, maybe. Before hanging up, he said, I went back into the shed before it happened. The box was gone. I asked if he thought someone took it. He said quietly, I don't think anyone could have. Then he hung up. That was the last Thanksgiving I ever spent in Maine. People always talk about Thanksgiving as a time to be thankful, but no one tells you how strange it feels to spend it surrounded by strangers, pretending everything's normal. 3 years ago, I had just moved to Bend, Oregon for a new job. Didn't know anyone yet. My apartment still smelled like fresh paint and cardboard boxes. A week before the holiday, a coworker named Rachel invited me to her family's Thanksgiving dinner. We always have room for one more, she said. It's at my uncle's house, quiet but cozy. I should have said no. The drive took nearly an hour. The farther we got from town, the darker it got. Tall pines pressing close on both sides of the road, headlights bouncing off fog. Uncle Gary likes his space, Rachel said with a laugh. No neighbors for miles. When we finally turned onto a gravel road, the trees parted to reveal a long, low house with a wraparound porch. Light spilled from the windows, warm and golden. Inside, everything smelled like roasted turkey and cedarwood. The house was packed, at least 15 people, all talking at once. Everyone seemed friendly, though I couldn't keep the names straight. There were too many. The only one who didn't say much was Uncle Gary. He was tall, quiet, with gray hair, the kind of eyes that looked like they were always studying something. When I shook his hand, his grip was dry and cold. You're the guest, he said softly. Glad you made it. Something about the way he said glad didn't sound glad at all. Dinner was loud and cheerful. The table stretched almost the whole length of the room, candles flickering down the center. Halfway through, I realized no one was really eating. Plates were full, silverware untouched. People kept talking, laughing too loudly, clinking glasses, but the food just sat there, steaming. When I took a bite of turkey, the room went strangely quiet. Everyone looked at me. Rachel smiled tightly. It's good, right? I swallowed, forcing a nod. Yeah, perfect. The conversation slowly started again, but I noticed no one else picked up their forks. After dinner, people moved to the living room. A fire burned low in the stone fireplace. Someone put on old records, soft jazz, crackling through static. I sat on the couch near the window, trying to make small talk. Rachel disappeared into the kitchen. That's when I noticed the family photos on the walls. Hundreds of them, every age, every generation. But the more I looked, the stranger they seemed. In all of them, one person's face was always turned slightly away from the camera. Sometimes a blur, sometimes a shadow, sometimes just the back of a head. And in every frame, that figure was standing in the same place, at the edge of the group, watching. I was still staring at one when Uncle Gary came up beside me. See anyone you recognize? He asked. I laughed nervously. No, just a lot of pictures. He nodded slowly. We take one every Thanksgiving. Tradition. Then he added, you'll be in this year's. He said it like a fact, not a question. A little later, Rachel came back, cheeks flushed. We're going outside for the photo, she said. The cold hit hard when we stepped onto the porch. The woods were black, the air sharp. Everyone arranged themselves on the steps, the same way they must have done every year. Uncle Gary set up an old camera on a tripod, the kind that used film. He looked through the viewfinder, then called, everyone ready. The flash went off, bright white, blinding. For a second afterward, everything looked washed out, silhouettes burned into my vision. When my eyes cleared, Uncle Gary was still staring through the camera. Rachel whispered, Uncle. He didn't answer. Then, very quietly, he said, someone moved. Everyone froze. He turned his head, slow as a clock hand, and looked straight at me. You, he said. I felt heat rise in my face. I didn't move. He didn't blink. Yes, you did. The air felt thin suddenly, like the woods were leaning closer. Rachel touched his arm. It's fine, Uncle. We can take another. He didn't look away from me when he said, no need. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and turned off the camera light. Inside, people went back to chatting like nothing had happened. I stood awkwardly by the doorway, trying to shake the weird feeling crawling up my neck. Rachel brought me pie, said she was sorry about her uncle. He's just particular about his photos. I forced a smile, but my stomach churned. I didn't touch the pie. A few minutes later, I heard the faint click-click-click of the film camera being wound again. Uncle Gary was standing in the hallway, taking pictures of the guests one by one. No flash this time, just the soft sound of the shutter opening and closing. When he reached me, he raised the camera. "Hold still," he said. I did. The shutter clicked. Then he lowered the camera and murmured, "That's better." By midnight, most of the guests had left. Rachel said I could stay the night. It was too icy to drive. She gave me a guest room near the back of the house. The walls were lined with more photos, all framed in wood. As I lay in bed, I could hear muffled voices downstairs, laughter, then the creak of floorboards. At some point, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, the room was dark except for the moonlight spilling through the window. Something felt wrong. I turned my head and saw a camera sitting on the dresser, pointed directly at the bed. The lens cap was off. I sat up fast, heart hammering. I didn't remember it being there before. When I reached for it, a faint flash of movement caught my eye. A shadow under the door, someone walking past slowly. Then came the click, the sound of another camera, just outside the room. Footsteps moved down the hall. Another click. I stood completely still, every muscle locked. After a moment, silence. Then a whisper, close to the door. "Hold still." I don't remember falling asleep again. Maybe I never did. When I opened my eyes, morning light filled the room. The camera was gone. I packed fast and went downstairs. The house was empty. No voices, no laughter, no smell of food. The dining table was cleared, chairs pushed in perfectly. On the counter sat an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a Polaroid. It was the group photo from last night, everyone on the porch, smiling. Except now, there was one more person in the picture, standing in the back, half hidden behind Uncle Gary. It was me. I drove back to Bend without stopping once. When I got home, I shoved the photo into a drawer, told myself I was tired, that maybe someone had made a copy, a trick of the light, anything. That was 3 years ago. Every Thanksgiving since, a new envelope shows up in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, another photo, each one a little different. The same family, the same house, and every year, I'm standing a little closer to the camera. You've just listened to true Thanksgiving horror stories. 8 real tales of quiet fear, told by the ones who lived them, or say they did. Maybe you noticed something they all shared. It wasn't ghosts or monsters, but the moments in between. The silence after the laughter, the empty seat at the table, the sound you can't explain when the house should be asleep. That's the thing about Thanksgiving. We tell ourselves we're safe, that being surrounded by family means nothing bad can reach us. But sometimes, the danger isn't outside the door. Sometimes it's been sitting across the table all along, smiling, carving the turkey, asking how you've been. And when the dishes are done and the lights go out, maybe you'll think about one of these stories. Maybe you'll remember a sound, or a face, or a detail you can't quite place. And maybe, just maybe, you'll wonder what really happened that night. Thank you for joining us for this series. Stay safe, stay aware, and have a happy Thanksgiving.